All right, friends, welcome back to another episode of Healedish. I brought Jedidiah Hartley back on because y'all had a lot of feelings about the podcast that we did together. A lot of good feelings, a lot of people saying that they found it very healing as they're coming out of these different sectors and you're very familiar with it. So it's healing to just not feel like you're crazy, that you knew that something was wrong and that this is validating some of that stuff that is going on behind the scenes. So we thought that it would be fun if I brought him back on and we did some Q&A questions because you guys did have a lot of questions for him. So thank you so much, Jedidiah, for coming back.
My pleasure. Yeah, I really enjoyed our last conversation. And I think I was only planning on it being an hour or an hour and a half, and it ended up being like 3 hours. So I had a lot of fun with the last one.
I know. I'm like, there's way too much to talk about, right. And then we're back. So There's still more to talk about. And somebody had screen recorded a clip of it and put it on X or Twitter. And there were a lot of emotions around that one. So we will talk about that later on in the episode. But starting off, somebody wanted to know, what do you think made your dad the way that he is? Do you think he was born that way, or nature or nurture?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be a little bit of both nature and nurture with the way that throughout my life, I saw my father's sort of continual descent into madness, I think is probably the best word, of just really embracing some of the worst tendencies of himself. I think it's hard because there's a lot of people, especially like family members, like my extended family, who has a lot of really positive memories of him. Even myself, like when we were younger, I mean, he's a funny, interesting guy and had a lot of redeeming qualities about him. And I think that it's hard because talking with them or talking with what ministers have listened to me, usually it's weird because there's a lot of ministers who I used to see my dad kind of partner with and travel with who have like dropped off the face of the map when it comes to like talking with me about any of this sort of stuff. So I have no idea what they're thinking, but the ones who have like engaged with me and been like, I'm so sorry, and I heard about this, there's this sort of like, man, I don't remember your father being like this. And it's difficult because it didn't happen in a day. It didn't like something didn't switch. And there really were a lot of like narcissistic, delusional traits that my father really leaned towards growing up. But I think that it was just this long process of at Bethel, at Morning Star, at Cheon's church, H-Rock, like he would go to these places and you would just continually see him, or my family would probably corroborate saying this, but we would see him just slowly get further and further removed from reality, where he would really start buying his own beliefs in himself. And then when my parents divorced and they separated, that was a very defining moment for him because my mom kept him in check a lot. Like she was the only one who could kind of tell him no, or would tell him no. And so when they separated, he just kind of, what little sort of conscience he had just kind of turned off, and he got really low impulse control. That's when he started sending photos to people unwarranted. He started doing a lot of that sort of stuff. So when people, it's not like I can identify one thing that happened to him, but I know certainly that delusions of grandeur that were supported by the community he was around did not help with his mental health stuff.
Yeah, and just having them all be affirmed. I think like we talk about like the Christian famous, I'm sure that can really go to your head when you are just so highly esteemed at every place you're going to. It's like when you walk in, kind of like when you were saying, when you guys went to Bethel, there is the parking spot and there's the, oh, he's here. And I'm sure that it's easier to live in that reality than the reality that you guys were at home, where like he couldn't pack his suitcase and,
Right.
like you want to believe the best of yourself. So these people are like borderline worshiping you and think that you're amazing, so you're going to like gravitate more towards this sector, I feel like.
That's an excellent and very accurate analysis, because as it got worse in his sort of personal life, he had to go bigger in his public life, because he had to sort of, what insecurities he had about whether abusive tendencies or whether just like can't, function and can't pack his own suitcase sort of thing. He needed this larger persona to sort of validate those things. And then the more he would lean into that public persona, the more his mind would sort of fracture and shift. And so it was a vicious cycle in which he needed the fame to validate himself, but then the fame helped tear him apart sort of internally.
Yeah. And then I'm sure once he didn't have your mom, which good for her that she got out,
Right.
but now he doesn't have someone to keep him in check with like the addiction stuff that he was going through. So then it's just like a giant spiral after that. And I can really relate to that because I won't say who, but I know someone in my circle, and it was very similar. He was kind of normal, and then till he kind of hit a point and there was like this very big shift in him. And were those traits always like kind of there underlying a little bit, like these tendencies, they were always there, but there was like a significant break with this person who's in my life. And like previously it's interesting that you talk about how he couldn't pack his own suitcase. Like this person was like, oh, I can't do these basic things for me. You have to do these things for me because I can't do them myself, and then they also kind of just spiraled. So it's hard when you still have like good memories from before the break. I mean, obviously like growing up in IHOP was not great, but you do have some positive memories with him, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it's not like all of his positive qualities just disappear, and he's still a human being who has some redemptive qualities. They definitely, a lot of them did disappear, but and you want to see, I think there's this sort of tipping point where the positive qualities can outweigh all of this other stuff that's going on, and it's not necessarily that something dramatically shifts in between, but more, I think that there's a tipping point for people like me or people who are surrounding him where you suddenly can't excuse his behavior anymore. And after that, it wasn't necessarily that he suddenly became worse, but it was my perception of him sort of flipped, where I was like, I can't excuse this stuff anymore. And I think that's what's hard. And I think there's a lot of people who probably experienced a similar thing with my dad. Certainly my sisters and my mom and other people, but where it got worse, and then you couldn't remember the good things anymore. You were like, why was I doing, like, why I used to really have fun traveling with him. What did we do that was fun? What did I enjoy about that? And it becomes harder to remember what kind of grounded your positive relationship with this person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let me look at the next one. Oh, I was curious about this one too. In the last episode, you did talk about how he had different houses, how he had gotten a good amount of wealth throughout ministry. So someone asked, what did your dad make money-wise? And do you think that his prophetic career was motivated by money? I'd love to talk if we think other people's is motivated by money.
Yeah, so I think that my dad himself was very motivated by money and the prestige that came with having a successful, lucrative business. His ministry wasn't what made him money. It was his.
Oh, I forgot. You did tell me that.
Yeah, so
That
he had
he had a business on the side,
business.
right?
Right. Yeah. I don't remember if I said it on the last podcast, but it was Hartley's Executive Cleaners. We dream to clean. Your filth is our future. Your trash is our cash. That was the motto ingrained in my brain.
Oh, I bet.
Because I was one day going to, he was going to give me the keys to the kingdom, and I was going to continue on in the cleaning company empire. That never happened, but I remember growing up, like it was like a carpet cleaning business, and we cleaned theaters. So after like movie theaters were closed, like in between the 11 p.m. showing and then by 9 a.m. you had to get out of there, and it was just cleaning, doing like a deep clean of using like a leaf blower to blow out all the popcorn and stuff like that. So anyway, that was the business where he sort of made his money. He had good connections through my uncle. My uncle owned a bunch of theaters, and so he was able to kind of get a foothold in that. So that's sort of how he first got some money. And then since that business, like I don't really know the proportions of it. Maybe that was like 20% of his wealth that he's accumulated. And basically once you have money, it's really easy to make money. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, but like being wealthy when you already have wealth is pretty easy in the United States.
With like a very little bit of effort,
little bit of effort, little bit of ethics, just a very little ethics. Not like if no ethics, then it's great. It's quite easy.
Then you can make a lot.
You can make a lot, especially through real estate. I mean, real estate in the 2010s to the, that's it. That's the answer, is just like he invested in a bunch of real estate, was a landlord, and did a lot of Airbnb properties, and was able to grow a decent amount of wealth. I mean, he's not insanely rich or anything like that. And I will also say, being a prophet in the marketplace, which was what my dad's ministry was all about. It was about the God in all of life. So he wasn't exploring the God of the corner of the church, as he called it, but the God of all of life. And so kind of similar to like the 7 mountains mandate stuff, his mountain would be business. And so or the marketplace. And so he knew and was getting connected to people who were multimillionaires through that, and they thought he was a prophet. And if making money is easy when you're wealthy, and many other wealthy people believe you to be a prophet, you got the way sort of paved for you. So that's what he did.
So did he make much money during ministry, or not as much?
He definitely grew so when his ministry was growing, his businesses were also growing at the same time. And he was able to do a lot of things that, frankly, to me, looked like tax evasion, but we won't say that too loud.
We won't go there, no.
But because he had the ministry, and so you can sort of play around with the finances, where you put a lot of expenses in the ministry, and then have the ministry not make money, and therefore it's a tax. Get all these tax write-offs for these different things, and pay yourself through a stipend through the ministry. There's just a lot of different ways that you can kind of use ministry to avoid taxes. And there's sort of a natural ecosystem of growth between business and ministry when you hold the reins to both of those things. And so I definitely think that he was able to kind of use that in his favor quite a bit.
Would you say that a lot of these ministers who travel are very wealthy, maybe from doing stuff like that, because I can think of 3 or 4 people off the top of my head where it has been mentioned to me that they own multiple properties around the US and that they're like multimillionaires. Sean Bowles being one of them. I've heard that he sold a very, very expensive house out in California, and then he moved back to Texas. And Sean Foyt, I know that he has so many properties throughout. So I'm wondering, like, how common do you think that that is for people to do that?
Well, I think that it's interesting because the world that we're kind of connected with, it probably isn't as explicit, which is, I mean, the bar is so low. But like there's the Benny Hinn's and what's his name? Jimmy Baker's of the world, Jim Baker, like the prosperity gospel individuals make a ton of money off their ministries. And I mean, millions, and flying on private jets and all that sort of stuff. In the New Apostolic Reformation world, I don't know if the ministry is as lucrative as it is for some of these prosperity gospel megachurch people. Probably for people like Bill. Like Bill probably makes a shit ton of money, but through just ministry stuff. And I mean, I think that Bethel Music pulled in like $30 million last year or something crazy.
I'm sure.
But it's not necessarily making all of this money through the ministry. It's making all of these connections and power through the ministry that they then leverage into buying houses and having sort of consistent revenue streams that are outside of the ministry. It's this sort of marriage between, it's the dominionist stuff. It's the marriage between the marketplace and ministry. And you have like a boys club with it's like a country club where everybody within the country club, again, thinks that you're a prophet. I mean, that's an extremely lucrative position to be in, where you have connections to all these different people. Some of the wealthiest people in the United States are connected to the New Apostolic Reformation, and not just in the United States, it's also international. Like there's a lot of international money coming in, and
even celebrities really like Bethel. I remember when I was there, I know that Justin Bieber's mom had come one time. That was like a whole thing. And, I mean, it's not a small ministry. I think it's funny when I talk about it, people are like, they know exactly what it is or they've like never heard of it. But I mean, a lot of famous people are connected to Bethel or they like Bethel. I remember one kid actor who was in the Willy Wonka movie went on a mission trip with me.
Oh.
So yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, you're that dude from the Willy Wonka movie. So
I mean, it has a lot of influence and impact. And so there's people who are motivated by money and there's people who are motivated by power and prestige, like believing that they are God's chosen vessel and having people kind of worship them is what draws a lot of the ego. Like, so if I had to pinpoint what it is about the Bob Hartley's, the Mike Bickles of the world, it's more that draw to power. It's the prestige. I don't want to undercut the sort of wealth. Like, again, it is extremely profitable. And like, I don't know. The fact that there are individuals who are making millions of dollars off of these ministries, prophetic ministries too, like the idea that you would charge people hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to go to a prophetic conference is crazy to me. Think about that. You believe that you have a divine connection to the Almighty, so much so that you're going to train others in having a divine connection to the Almighty. And you need money? Like, no. If God wanted, you could just ask him for the lottery numbers if God wanted to give it to you. Like, the idea that anybody who's prophetic needs to be charging people to share their prophecies or to teach them how to prophesy is wild stuff.
Yeah. I wonder how much the speakers make. Do you have any idea? Because
Yeah.
the reason I ask is because I just had someone on, her episode just came out today, and her husband used to tour with Jesus Culture. And apparently Heidi Baker had said at a conference one time that the band should never accept payment for traveling and that they should only ever take up an offering. So she gave this prophetic word, and basically all of the band's family members suffered for years because they
Yeah.
were all super broke and they have children and they're splitting it between 5 members. And it's all because Heidi Baker said that they should not be allowed to charge any money. And I thought that that's kind of rich because I mean, they're providing a service for this conference that I'm sure other people are making a lot of money on because you're charging for tickets. So where is all of that money going?
Yeah.
So I was just curious if you knew if they're making money for coming and speaking.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, every time a minister is going to share at a conference, churches, it's different. But like conference, every speaker is paid for a conference. Everyone who's gone to the Open Heavens conference, to Cheon's leadership, that is, they get paid, they get stipends, they get, and sometimes is it $5,000 to come speak? That would be on the lower end. It would probably be $20,000 to $30,000 for, I want to, because I want to be accurate with this because, maybe some of it changes. It is also, what sometimes can happen too is that you will have them come to a conference and then Bethel or this ministry will then donate to my father's ministry, Deeper Waters. I remember my dad got like a $60,000 donation from, I can't remember if it was Bethel or from IHOP. I can't remember who, but 2012 or so, he got this. And I remember thinking, why? Like, he has businesses. His businesses are doing great, and he doesn't need this. And meanwhile, my dad was also selling subscriptions to his like weekly prayer thing where people would like sign up. And then if they signed up, he would get their names and then he would prophesy over them in the, like that week. But he had to be careful about it because it couldn't be a pay for prophecy thing. It was
That's what I was about to say. That toes a very uncomfortable line of, are we paying to hear God through you? Because I think that most Christians, even in these sectors, would agree that that's unethical. And that like Jesus would not be like, yes, have people pay you to hear my voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind of always that like, toe the line sort of, and the way that he would even talk about it, he was like, well, we got to make it clear in our wording that it's not guaranteed that you'll get a prophecy, but basically like join this group. And then if you're in it, sometimes I pray over people. Sometimes I get, pray over these names and whatnot, but you're really subscribing to the Hope 365 or whatever he called it. That was like his ministry constant like update platform, and maybe it was like a couple $100 a month or something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, there was all of these different revenue streams, a lot of like selling. You go to these conferences too. They're lucrative because you sell your books, like you bring your table.
Did he have books?
Yeah. So he couldn't like sit down and write to save his life. So he had books that other people had kind of written with his content. But like his bestseller was, he had an adoration book that was like teaching people how to pray for hours on end, and like do prophetic prayers. And it was kind of like a workbook, and people would use that a lot and pay, And every time we're going to a conference, it's like, Jed, you got to be on top. You got to make sure that we're pushing. We got to get our books and our stuff into Bethel's bookstore and this, and you got to be manning this table and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, it was like a musician, like a traveling musician, where you got like your merch that you got to sell. And
yeah. Did you feel like he lived that out? I know, oh my gosh, there's still so many questions. I just keep asking my side questions, but do you feel like he lived that out? Because you're talking about praying for on hours on end. Is that something that you saw your dad do at home? Like dad goes into his office and he prays for hours and hours?
I mean, he was very performative with it. So he would pray and he would want us to sit with him. So it would be like something that he would do, especially when we were younger. He would have us sit on the bed and he would pray for like an hour straight. And we would just have to sit there. And it was one of those like traumatizing things that it's really hard describing to like your therapist and whatnot, because it's like, it just feels so claustrophobic. Like you can't move because you're supposed to have this holy reverence for what is going on. But like, not only is it boring, but sometimes he would be kind of rude in his prayers where he would pray about you. So this is what I think he was doing or I know what he was doing to at least some extent. He would pray all the time. But he had mental health issues, and it was sort of his way of auditorily processing through things that he was going on. There's videos, they're probably still up here, but when Mike Bickle in 2023, late 2023, was being accused of everything that he was being accused for, and this was still, things were still coming out and it was very tumultuous. And this was before I had spoken up about him. And so he had not been banned from IHOP. He was going to the prayer room and he was praying on the microphone. And one thing I remember in one of the prayers that he gave, he was praying to God and he was like, God, you're the God of the abuser and the abused. And it was this sort of like, you have a heart for everyone, whether they're an abuser or abused. And it was this weird, like, sort of psychological confession that he was doing where he was like, I know that Mike and I are abusers, but God, you care about us too, sort of thing. And it was a very intense, prayer. So I think that he would do that, and it wasn't purely performative. It was very much like psychologically and spiritually calming for him to be able to like process through using prayer and adoration.
That's so interesting. Okay, someone wanted to know, can you talk more about the KC prophets, specifically Bob Jones? So you can educate me a little bit, maybe like tell people who that even is, because I was obviously more in the Bethel sector, had family who went to IHOP and a little bit about Kansas City, but I don't know the history. And obviously you know all of the history. So,
well, I know a lot of the history. No one can know all of the history because everybody lies in that world. So like the separating the myth from the reality, Bob Jones even didn't know himself probably what was myth and what was not. But so Bob Jones, I can answer more details about him because we literally could go for like 2 hours me just talking about him. So I'll give broad strokes, and then if you want me to get more specific, let me know. But
cool.
Bob Jones was a mad prophet of the hills. He was from North Carolina, and he traveled, and he was very instrumental in the foundation of the International House of Prayer, the foundation of Morning Star, and the foundation or the prophetic identity of Bethel. Bethel has morphed over the years, but he was really behind the scenes. He was really, really important to Bethel's identity. But he was when I talked about previously about how my father would fiddle with that line of like sane and insane and sort of use it to his own ethos of being this sort of mad prophet, Bob Jones really was that. He would talk about stuff like I remember one of my early memories with him was we were at Kansas City Fellowship or Metro Fellowship in a side room or side building, and it was during a conference, and he talked about the golden goose, and he was like, well, there's the golden goose, and where he's gonna lay in his egg. He talked kind of like this, and then he'd be like, oh, you put your hand up, you feel that? Oh, you feel the winds of the west are coming in, and I don't know if I'm giving a good impersonation of him, but he had this like...
I'm getting a picture in my mind.
Yeah. And he would speak in riddles, and he would speak very weird metaphorically. But he had this huge ethos about him where people just revered him as a real thus saith the Lord sort of John the Baptist, this madman from the hills, has been touched by God. And so he had a lot of different prophetic legacy stuff, especially in the 80s and 90s, that is the sort of foundational to this movement and the church, the New Apostolic Reformation movement in general. I mean, he was, so for people who don't know about the New Apostolic Reformation, when I talk about that, it's this movement that really was built around prophecy and apostles. And the Kansas City prophets were many of the most prestigious prophets of this world. It was like, okay, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, God has done something new, and he's speaking to prophets. And now there's going to be prophets and apostles that are anointed that are going to lead the church. And the first sort of group of apostles and prophets that were anointed were Paul Cain, Bob Jones, Mike Bickle, some of these there were other individuals who were kind of in there, John Paul Jackson. People won't be super familiar with these names, but it was sort of these 80s and 90s prophets who all kind of were collecting around Kansas City. They weren't from Kansas City necessarily, but they were all kind of collecting around Kansas City and having these prophetic round tables, and they were talking about this new move and of God that was going to happen. And they didn't all really get along with each other. In fact, they really didn't like each other at a lot of, from what I could tell. And they all were elbowing each other to be the most important of the group, and using.
It's probably why they didn't get along.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of like egos in one room, probably,
right,
who want to like be the most chosen, or my prophetic voice is the most prophetic voice, Yeah. So that's a lot of energy.
My mom once used the phrase, she's like a lot of peacocks in one pen. And that's, and then every time she said that, and then she was quoted in some article about it, and she was like so embarrassed. And so she would be very embarrassed hearing this, but yes, it's a great metaphor.
No, it's true.
Because they were all peacocking, and they all kind of used each other to elevate one another, but they all wanted to be at the sort of top. And somehow Bob Jones kind of got to the top of it. And he was, so just a little bit more about him. I mean, he was just clearly mentally unwell. And there's a book by this man, Bob Scott, who has been talking on John Collins' podcast and has been talking about Mike Bickle. And he talks about how he kind of was in that early, like he was in Kansas City, same time I was just a kid, but during those early years, formational years. And Bob Jones had his first wife, Viola, was they would fight all the time. And even I knew about this. My dad would tell me about this. She passed away before I don't have a whole lot of memories of her. But they would fight all the time, and Bob Jones would just be actually literally abusive, physically abusive. And Bob Scott, they're all named Bobs. It's so many Bobs. But Bob Scott writes in his book about how one time they came over to Bob Jones' house because there was some domestic thing that was going on, and they found Bob Jones had taken Viola and was holding her head in the toilet. And I like Scott for that he's speaking up a lot about a lot of these things, but he kind of breezed through that in his book. And he kind of is like, oh, but Bob was a good guy with this. And that's always how it was. That's always how it was growing up, where I would hear these stories about how Bob Jones did just some of the most horrific things. And it was like, yeah, but like he's anointed by God. And it was this sort of like, how can he be so anointed by God but do these things? Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that's where like it's so frustrating to me because it's always like the congregation, we're supposed to live by all of these morals and, you get put up on a stage if you do something wrong, but then the leaders are like actually committing really horrible offenses and this domestic violence behind the scenes, which I'm glad you pointed out that that's not like a small thing. Like he could have killed her by doing that, so it's horrific how much these things just get brushed under the rug, like as if that's not a very violent incident that could have led to something much worse.
Yeah, and I call me woke, call me whatever you want. That's a disqualifying thing for both a marriage and a ministry. Like, I don't want to be, if I find out like if one of my sisters came to me and said, God forbid, my sisters have excellent, fantastic husbands, so I don't have to think about this. But if one of them came to me and was like, oh, so-and-so and I got in a spat and he held, it was real quick, but he held my head in the toilet. Like I would be like, oh, we're going to the police. And like, this isn't a reconcile, go to therapy thing. Like that's like so demeaning and dangerous. Not only is it like, you could have really harmed her, but just such a demeaning thing to do to your spouse. And we're supposed to be listening to this guy as, again, he's supposed to be the mouthpiece of God for an entire generation. This was the ego on these men, is that it wasn't just a pastor. It wasn't just a political figure. It was supposed to be the voice of God in our day and age. And like the voice of God doing these things.
And like, how does that not mess with, just going on my soapbox, okay, but how would that not like mess with your theology to think, so God chose this man who is doing these things and repeatedly doing horrific acts, he chose this man to be the mouth of this prophetic movement. I mean, that, I feel like that would tear apart my theology very quickly to be like, well, why? Doesn't make much sense.
Can I worship a God who chooses better people? Like, and not even of
but
this,
like woke Jedidiah is bad. I know. The worst thing you can be is woke. So
I might not, be shoving my partner's head in the toilet, but I am woke. So you got to take what you can. Yeah.
Well, some people would take this, but it's crazy because, even when I told people what my ex had done and that he had strangled me, I had family and friends who were looking in the Bible to try to tell me if I was allowed to get divorced. I mean, this was a topic that was going on for a couple weeks. I had friends who texted my ex and said, hey, praying for your marriage, praying that you guys are going to be okay, and who were championing us to stay together even after they knew that he could have killed me, and there's always this sort of vibe of, well, were they really sorry? If they were really sorry, like, well, he has such a high calling on his life, but there's never any consequences that really go in line with the acts that are happening, or really no true repentance. I think that's like the biggest thing. If people want to, you and I might be like, that disqualifies, okay? But I hear people in the back of my head and I know what they would say, like, God forgives, I understand. But like are these people repentant, or are they kind of power hungry, and they're getting away with very horrible things, and we're just allowing it and believing that they are speaking the word of God just because they look like a mad scientist, and it just seems like they're disconnected from the earth, so we trust them more. It's
and there is more control and accountability for how people respond to being abused than there are for people who are abusers. So a husband who chokes his wife in this context is going to face less accountability than the wife who divorces the husband immediately for this violence, because the response, it's like, we can't control the abusers, but we can control the abused. And people don't even understand. Like, I used to think about this all the time with like, well, yeah, but your dad's a man of God, or Bob Jones is a man of God, and he's so anointed, and we don't want to disqualify. And it's like, what about me? Like, the abuses that are being inflicted on me are like keeping me from being able to flourish and do, like, what about my mom? What about you? What about Viola? Like, what about all of these victims who would be able to do greater things if they weren't being abused? They weren't, like abuse, it's like injuries. Like, I'm not going to be able to run a race if you broke my leg, sort of thing. And the way this community protects and only thinks about the future and identity of these abusers without giving consideration of the abused. And let's face it, it's pretty often misogynistic too, of like, the men have these great mantles and the women need to like support these great mantles. And it's like, what about these women? The first thing, man, we're supposed to answer questions, and I just get on.
I know. No, I'm right there with you.
The first thing that like really got me to be like, I don't know if I want to be in this world, and to be like this, to question the IHOP and New Apostolic Reformation world in general, was not actually even the way that my father was. Not. It didn't really have to do with my dad. It had everything to do with my sisters. I have 3 sisters who are like far and away some of the most impressive, competent people. Like, this isn't just me being like a nice brother. Like, legitimately, they are incredibly smart and successful individuals. And like, I saw the way that their voices were muted and the way that they were dismissed and ignored in the community that I grew up in. And I was like, this is dumb. Like if we want to talk about mantles, if we want to talk about anointings that are being squashed, don't talk about cancel culture. Don't talk about these men who are being held accountable for sexually assaulting people. Talk about all the women who never got a chance to flourish because they grew up in a misogynistic culture. Okay.
That's so true.
Sorry, had to.
I love the love that you have for your sisters. Did you want to say anything else about Bob Jones, or did you want to go to the next one?
Oh, I mean, we could go forever about Bob Jones, but we should probably keep going.
Okay. All right. So, did Bill Johnson know why Bob was asking for the list of names at the conference?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that have been a red flag?
Yeah. So specifically, I'll get in more detail of what this was. Before every conference, my dad would, every Bethel conference, my dad would contact Bill's assistant, and he would ask for a list of names for the conference. Should this have been a red flag? Absolutely. I didn't realize that he was doing this. I knew that we got the names. So it's really funny because when I was 20, I think it was like 23. Yeah, the clips from that we had in the last episode of my dad prophesying. Those were all clips that were from a conference I literally was at. In some of those clips, you can even see my scrawny 22-year-old ass, and it, like praying for people in the fire tunnel and stuff.
Stop.
And so I was there, and I remember that was one of the first moments where like I was like, this doesn't feel right. And I remember kind of sitting in the conference and hearing him, knowing that he had gotten the names and being like, okay, these prophecies are a lot just about names. Like the hawk one is a very, like he's like, I saw a David who was soaring like a hawk. And then someone stands up and it's like, oh, my name's David Hawk. And he's like, that makes sense. Or I saw a Brenda who drives a van, and there was a Brenda Van Winkle. And it's like, those are just the names. That's not even looking up any information. You just like, you have their first and last names. And Bill knew that my dad was getting those names, and like gave the green light for his assistant to send the names to my dad. And I think back then I was like, man, Bill is just the most naive person I've ever met. And now I'm like, nah, no, that's not what it was.
And I used to think that. I think that surprisingly, he was the last thing to fall for me, you know, because I think that, and even people who I've talked to who still talk to Bill and are friends with Bill, like I've talked to people who think relatively highly of him still. And the major defense that I get of Bill from people is that he's super naive, that he just doesn't know.
Yeah.
But I think and we'll get into it more later, where that piece finally fell for me was when I found out that you had been telling Bill, my dad is a predator, you need to keep him away, and that he didn't care and didn't do it and still chose to sit with him at the conference. To me, that was where I was like, oh, no, this has nothing to do with being naive. And actually, I don't know this leader. And like, maybe we don't know any of these leaders really as well as we think we do.
Yeah. And I think there's a sort of performative or willing ignorance where it's just like, I'm going to refuse to look at these things. Like any negative criticism or feedback, I'm just going to like ignore. And I think that he even maybe thinks that it's good and holy what he's doing, because he's like, I remember, I don't remember if he said it or if my dad said it in reference to him, but there's this mentality of like, eat the meat, spit out the bones sort of stuff, where it's, we talked about this last time too, but it's just like, only believe the best in people. But you have to take accountability somewhere. Like you have to, especially if you're the shepherd of a flock. Like if you're the leader of a church, and obviously the sexual abuse that was going on is like more extreme, but even the prophetic abuse, like you cannot be a minister who's like talking about all the miracles that are happening and not do like a shred of due diligence to like vet the people who are going up onto your platform. Like that's just irresponsible and like maliciously irresponsible, because guess who benefits off of that? Bill does. It gets bigger. Like the more people who, you know, can join the group, especially if they never get called out for it, the more prestige Bethel has. And, you know, it's just this like, it's like some hypothetical group of really wealthy individuals were doing some really suspicious stuff. And you were like, oh, they might be doing it. There's a point where you suddenly become accountable for not speaking up against it. If you're like, oh, okay, sure, I was there, but they were paying me money. So why do I, you know, and it's like, I'm going to believe the best about this political figure and that political figure. And it's like, if they're abusing people or if they're lying and they're using your platform to commit fraud, you got to protect your community. You got to speak up about it. And, you know, you can only feign ignorance for so long before it's like, now we're not buying this anymore. But I mean, I know that people still do buy it with him, but.
And you don't need, in my opinion, why would you ever need a list of names to supposedly pray over? Like, I just have a very hard time believing that anybody would hear that request and not think that red flags are going off, especially if it's every time. And then he comes up, and the video that I had shared on Healdish that you gave me was of your dad calling out this woman, and he said, "Do you know someone named this?" And, "Oh my gosh, that's my husband who's standing right next to me." You know, it's like, at some point, come on, you know, I mean, these are, like you're saying, these are all named based prophecies, you know, and how would you not think that something is going on there? So, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting that, I mean, a lot of people were doing it though. From what I've heard, they were getting lists from other churches too. I believe that Sean Bowles had Life Center's list out in Harrisburg for that conference. So it seemed like it was a common enough practice, and you kind of get away with it because it sounds really holy to say, you know, I want to pray over all of these names, but could you not just say, "God bless every single person who's going to come to this conference. God, help me reach them." And, you know, do you really need to say every single name, or does God know who you're talking to talking about because he's God? Like, do we really need the list, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and in a lot of my conversations, especially about Bill, I still try to like give him a little bit of like, well, maybe, you know, you should be responsible for these things. On the like, even if you believe the best and do this, like these should be raising red flags. Yeah. Alternatively, this could just be the plan. Like, you know, Bill could fully know that none of these prophets are like, he could be totally malicious. And in fact, like I used to have suspicions about Mike Bickle being this way. And then, lo and behold, it did come out that he was doing all of these abusive tendencies and stuff. And so, yeah. I mean, Bill Johnson could just be being like, I don't care. I want these people in this. Of course it's false. Of course they're making this stuff up. As long as they do it and don't get caught, this is just going to help build my ministry. And maybe he excuses it in a, you know, I don't know if he's like doing the like sitting at his desk with his fingers plotting. But at the same time, like at this point, the ethics of these leaders clearly are different than the ethics of the people in the community. Like, it's just not, it's not the same. And like, well, and especially with what Bill was telling my dad, like, I just don't think that he cared. I think that it was about power and impact, and maybe it was excused in this sort of like, if it leads people to Jesus, I don't care if it's a lie. Like, or maybe if it leads to my pocketbook, I don't care. You know, I don't know. But yeah, I think that it's time for these leaders to face some accountability for what's going on.
No, I agree. And I was thinking about like when everything really came out with Sean Bowles, and I, you know, since it hit the fan, you know, with all of this stuff. And now Mike Winger's doing videos asking, I don't know if you saw that one. Mike Winger did that video trying to get accountability with Elijah and all of that.
With like the Elijah list, or what was the accountability?
No, so Elijah had been conned by a prophetic word, and they were kind of like making a plea to Bethel to take responsibility, and they gave Bethel 30 days to respond. So we're like halfway through. We're going to see if, I doubt it, but
what happens?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But I think throughout this whole period, I've been thinking to myself, at least when it comes to Sean, I'm kind of convinced that this guy doesn't even like believe in God at all. Because I'm like, if you have any fear of God, if you have any fear of the Lord, you would not be doing this, because you would be like, I'm going to go to hell. So it makes me think maybe he doesn't believe in it at all. So he's like not worried. Like, maybe the goal is to just get rich. I mean, obviously we can't get into the minds of these people, but I'm like, if you truly believe in God, you love God on any level, and you fear him, you wouldn't be being a false prophet. So it makes me wonder if the whole faith is just like fake, you know?
I had probably one of the most intense conversations of my life. Not probably, like, this was definitely the most intense conversation in my life, where this was after a lot of the stuff had come out about my dad and his sort of abusive nature. And I flew to Kansas City to stage an intervention with the help of some of my family members, my extended family members and cousins and uncles, to get my dad to face some accountability. And he wouldn't, I think I maybe told you some of this, but he wouldn't talk with me. He literally, he was living with, this is crazy, but he was living with, what's his name? Bickle, Mike Bickle's son. I'm forgetting what his first name is. But he was living, Mike Bickle's son was literally living with my dad during this period of time. And when my dad heard that I was coming in town, he and Bickle's son tried to like get him out, like he was on the lam, like hiding from me. It was very weird. I've written a lot about this in my own journals, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good book when I finally write it. But
yeah.
But so I'm in Kansas City. The last day I'm there, I tell my dad, like, hey, I'm going to this racquetball court because he's not going to come for like, he sniffed out the intervention. He was going to be out of control in the sense that, like, he wasn't going to be able to control the narrative in the situation if everybody's there at an intervention. So I told him, I was like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going home. If you want to talk to me, I'm going to be at the Great Fitness or whatever it was from 2 to 4 at this racquetball court. And my dad showed up, and I tried to play him in racquetball. This is a whole different story. I tried to play him in racquetball to bet that, like, basically if I win, you go to rehab. If I lose, I'll give you like 60 days to do whatever your own thing is before I speak out publicly about anything, as this sort of last ditch attempt to like get him to be accountable for his behaviors. And in that conversation, I basically was like, we need to get you to rehab so we can have a hard conversation. Like, this isn't the hard conversation yet. Like, you need to be sober before we have the hard conversation about your abusive tendencies and the people that you have abused and what you need to do about that. But in it, at the very end, I remember talking with him, and I was like, for all of your life, I have seen what I don't know how to describe other than favor upon your life. I've seen you get away with things that you should have never gotten away with. And I told him, I was like, we both know you probably should have been in jail at many different times. And he was like, he's agreeing with me during this. And I was like, whatever halo of favor that you have had throughout your life, it is fading. Now, you don't have this favor anymore. And I have to ask you, you only have so many years left on this earth, and you have used the name of God to anoint your lips and then abused people, to give you the power to sexually abuse people. You're going to have to be accountable for that, And I don't even know if I fully believe in God and what is and what isn't heaven and what we'll be accountable for or whatnot. But I knew that he professed that belief. And so I'm like, you know that you have used God's name to anoint your lips, to speak false prophecies, to gain power and sexually abuse people. How are you going to defend that? And this is
what's the plan?
What's the plan? How are you going to, you're not going to be able to lie to God. You're not going to be like, oh, I was hacked. I didn't send these things, or, oh, this is all lies. You're not going to be able to blame the women. You're going to have to be accountable to the truth. This is the same with Mike Bickle too. Like, Mike Bickle groomed dozens of women using prophecies. Again, having the Lord's name anoint their lips. I mean, if there's anything like using the Lord's name in vain, it's this, for their own sexual exploits. How are you going to defend that?
Justify that. Mm-hmm.
So when you say these men don't believe or have no fear of the Lord, I agree with you. I think that that's the big, in a secular world, this wouldn't come as a shock. But in our world that we grew up in.
Yes, it is jarring. To think
that Mike Bickle doesn't even believe in God, or that Bill Johnson might have never really even might not even be drinking his own Kool-Aid on a lot of this stuff. And it's just about power and money and prominence. Of course, we can't say to what extent, but I don't know. And for all of the people who inevitably get mad at me for saying these things, you believe in God too. And if there is a heaven, I expect apologies from every single one of these people who say that I'm not telling the truth. They got to come up and be like, okay, it'll all be good. I'll forgive everybody who's saying mean things about me online,
Yeah, because we'll talk about that later. We did get some of those, which was cute.
Yeah, I've had so much of that. I mean, speaking up against your dad is messy business. I've had the first now people kind of respect and appreciate my voice, but at first I was kind of speaking up. It was nasty business to begin with, where I felt this sense of desperation and felt like there was not a whole lot of people listening. And I tweeted out something. This was after I had confronted my dad and done all of this. And this was before, but when I was going to need to confront Bethel and about him being a predator in their midst. But I did my first tweet that was basically my dad's a fraud. He's always been a fraud. And it ended up having 2 million impressions online or some on Twitter. But I sent it and then I went to work. And for 2 hours, there was 2 likes on it. And then the first comment was I can't remember what the person said, but it was you're crazy. None of this happened, or something very gaslighting, weird stuff, because I had been speaking out against Mike Bickle. And so there were some trolls who were kind of following me. And I remember being man, this is going to be it. I'm going to tell people about my dad and nothing's going to happen and no one's going to believe me. And I remember going to work and being well, fortunately I was in a place where there wasn't any service. So I left for 3 or 4 hours and I was teaching kids chess, and I come back to 500,000 impressions at that time on there. And I was oh, okay.
You're maybe, people care.
Maybe people do listen. Okay. That's good. And I also was oh shoot, I misspelled a few things on there. I didn't realize that it's going to be all that attention. But yeah, I don't know why. Oh, just with it's just, whenever you try to speak out about injustice and abuse, you're always going to face these negative feedback stuff. And
absolutely. I get it every day.
Oh,
and it's not just when it comes to Bethel. Oh my gosh, some of the most, it's interesting. People have messaged me, and I don't talk about what I believe online anymore, but some people have messaged me and said that I shouldn't be mad at God for what people have done. And I will actually say that my church hurt, however people want to phrase it, has not affected my relationship with God at all. That has had no factor in my beliefs at all, surprisingly. But, I will post about purity culture and the harms and people being abused, people being raped and being told that it was their fault for what they were wearing. And then I get the most horrible comments of people saying, well, you look like a girl who's been run through. Like, it's crazy.
What?
And you go to, yes, and you go to these people's profiles and Jesus, Bible verses. It's crazy. And I'm like, y'all are going to have to, like, according to your belief system, you're going to have to account for that someday, because the hate that is spewed is, it's so sad, because like you were saying, there is this very prominent trend where people who speak out against abuse get the heat rather than the abusers themselves, because they don't want to hear it. Like it's upsetting to, I don't know. It's upsetting to destroy the illusion of Bethel or the New Apostolic Reformation when you've put all of your eggs in this basket, maybe moved across the world to participate in it, and you don't want anybody to say anything bad about Bill. Because if you're just watching his online stuff, he seems very wise and humble, and, but okay, leading into my next question. How much, I don't know if you know the answer to this, so we may not know, but how much did Chris and Jason know about the list and the abuse before? So we know that Bill knew about the list. Do we think that Chris and Jason did? And then did they also know about that abuse that you had brought up to Bill at that point?
I will say, let me just be explicit about it. I don't like Chris. I don't, there's a lot of things that he does that have always rubbed me the wrong way. Like I don't feel bad saying that. At the same time, like, I can't really say that Chris is the villain with or was doing a lot of shady stuff with my dad, because Chris never really liked my dad. And again, Chris is the in-house prophet at Bethel, and you got to think the politics of this. My dad comes in and is an outsider prophet who is not interested in Chris at all, but is like enamored with Bill. And Bill becomes very enamored with my dad, and my dad claims to be able to do stuff that Chris can't do, and is more anointed and is more prophetic. I still don't really know what Chris prophesies about.
What's crazy is that I know he's the prophet of Bethel. Okay, I do know that. I was told that when I was a student there. I don't know that I ever heard Chris give a prophetic word ever. Honestly, the only one that I really remember is when he prophesied about the election and he got it wrong. I mean, I'm sure he does like the ones on Facebook and stuff, where it's like, it's a season of joy, or, whatever, like those sorts of prophecies. But I never knew him to be super prophetic when I was there, at least.
I don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't behind the scenes. I'm not sure. But I know that he didn't like my dad. And, to his credit, he was the first that I'm aware of, or there's other individuals in sort of our community, like some of my dad's Deeper Waters board members actually warned people back in 2017. But I'm pretty sure even before that, Chris had kind of confronted my dad and confronted Bill about my dad abusing prophecy and also having inappropriate relationships with young women, which I don't know the extent of this, and this is where I'm going to be careful and not. I'm going to say less, because I don't want to overstate. And this is obviously very complicated because, like, there's also victims involved, and so there's a lot that I don't tell, not because I'm worried about getting sued, but because like some victims just don't want their short stories told, and it is definitely not my place to share someone else's story if they don't want to have it be told. But so. From what I can tell, I do believe that Chris was raising the alarm about my dad, I believe since like 2015, 2016, certainly by 2017. And my dad was removed from the sort of conference circuit I think largely because of Chris. So again, I don't love the guy, but I want to be clear in this, like, especially when I am later criticizing Bill, like, this isn't me just like hashing out my vendettas. Like, this is, I've seen how these different men handled the situation with my father. And, Bill was protecting my dad, always was. Bill was the one who wanted to see my dad succeed and was not willing to hear much about his failures.
It's interesting that you say all that because I feel similarly. Like we said, we're going to be kind of vague with this because we don't know the full details as much as we know some of the other stuff that's been talked about. But I similarly do not enjoy Chris Valton. He drives me nuts with his posts and he's very defensive and I don't agree with how he's gone about the Sean Bowles thing. So I don't respect a lot of the actions there, but I will say he was the one who went out and confronted Sean.
Sure. Right.
And he didn't raise the alarm to everybody like they should have. That was negligence in my opinion, but at least he did go out and confront him. And I think when it comes to Chris, I would be more apt to believe that maybe that man does have the fear of God and does have bad judgment, more so than Bill, just because when it comes to Bill, I'm with Bill, we know that Bill did a TBN joint appearance with Sean Bowles after it was so known that
really?
He was. Yes. People ended up finding out that he had done a joint appearance with Sean Bowles and was hyping him up and was like, this book, Translating God, is so amazing. And this was way after Chris had already, kicked him out of the sector. So to me, if anybody's raising really, really high alarms, it's actually Bill. If we're going based on evidence and going based on refusal to listen to bad behavior, I would say that I'm more concerned about Bill than I am Chris Valton, despite the fact that I think Chris is kind of a hothead and he's not my favorite person in the whole
very
world.
problematic, online and
More of evolution, how I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. But and Jason, I will say I had one conversation with Jason. I have nothing bad to say about Jason. No, I don't know much about him, but I definitely don't think I don't think that Jason was protecting my dad from anything that I saw. So
cool. Do you think people at Bethel are also doing scam prophetic words to your knowledge? I feel like maybe we not know, because
and I am raising the alarm about things that I know. I have to be careful what I say I know, what I say I firmly believe because of firsthand evidence, and then sort of my worldview stuff. I really don't. I think it's, really manufactured. I think that the Bethel and testimony, and it's not just Bill, it's just I think a lot of the testimonies are just, there's a lot of different ways that this can happen. When you only share good testimonies, never share bad testimonies. When you don't have really any accountability, when there's individuals who are habitual liars who will get into this group and say, we went to this this missions trip in South Africa and 7,000 people gave their lives to the Lord, and someone in the missions trip is there were 400 people max there, that person.
I've heard stories like that from one ministry in particular, but yeah.
Might be the same. I mean, there's several of them. I mean, a lot of the prosperity gospel and the first wave charismatic people would do that too. A lot of inflation of numbers and stuff like that. So I think
everyone was healed.
Right,
Every
exactly.
single person.
Yeah, exactly. I saw 7 people raised from the dead, and it's who? And it's oh, I forget their names, and it's man, okay, maybe not.
It was really cool though.
Yeah, and when things like that, but the wake up olive situation, which I think that you've probably talked about before, So I won't go into details with that, but just the story of like a baby dies and the family who's at Bethel is like, we should raise the baby from the dead, and like totally reasonable thing for them to believe and have faith in, because everybody's talking about raising people from the dead. So like, and you know, they're probably every reason to be like, we're going to raise, and this is going to be a miracle. And this, especially if you're in a sort of sense of denial and grief, you know, if you're like, oh, this is going to happen. And in fact, something that is really tragic isn't going to be tragic. And it's actually going to be the start of a testimony of leading millions of people to the Lord. Totally understand their perspective. What was unique about that situation was the public sort of virality of it and the public exposure of it, not that it happened. Like, I know so many stories of people who have family members who died or tries to raise people from the dead for it not to happen. But those testimonies are hushed and never told at prophetic conferences and stuff like that. So when you have a community that's built on talking about only one slice of reality, that community just isn't going to be grounded in reality. It just isn't. And so this is all of that is like, obviously I'm coming from a very like knowledgeable first person perspective of being in this world and seeing behind the scenes. I also like, I totally understand if people, that's still their belief, and I want to get respect and give space for that. So I will say that I am skeptical, but this is more of like a worldview perspective than like no, I know for a fact I've seen how they do it. I've seen the conspiracy behind the scenes of how they all do it. That's not the whistle I'm blowing at the particular moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think, you know, we can only talk about what we know for sure, what we've heard, what we've seen. I mean, what I will say for me is, you know, we won't get into the worldview kind of thing on just prophecy in general, but one thing I will say is at my time at Bethel, I was taught from Chris Valton and just from these people to just step out in faith and just like say things. I was told to prophesy on the spot, and if you get it wrong, that's okay. That was very much the vibe in my first year at Bethel. And then there were many sermons where they talked about how when we are saved, our minds are transformed into the mind of Christ. So if you hear something and you're not sure it's God, it could be God because you have the mind of Christ. So in my opinion, I think that sure, are there people who are faking and doing data mining and stuff? I wouldn't be surprised, but I can't say for sure who else might be doing that. But I do think that there are a lot of people who I think genuinely believe that they are hearing God, you know? I genuinely believe, I'm not out here thinking that everybody there is just like super fake. I think like there were times where I would see someone and I felt a certain feeling towards them, and whether that just be me being intuitive or like catching up on their vibe, I thought that what I was saying like was from God at the time, you know, but obviously we were saying, we don't talk about all the times we get it wrong, you know? So it's kind of like, that's kind of like where I err on the side of when it comes to prophecy at Bethel, at least for like the community. I think that can be a common thing that happens.
Yeah. And I will say too, of if there are people who are prophesying, and this is when people approach me about like, was any of the things that your dad said true? The one thing that I will say is like, it is firm belief from evidence that it is my firm belief from years of evidence that I have gleaned that anytime there are specific information, like you are the 444
addresses,
woman, like, and it's, oh, that's my address or my phone number or something like that. I would be extremely skeptical. Obviously, you can't disprove anything like that because, like, that's impossible to prove where people have gotten
which
their
is why
source
it's
from.
such a lucrative business.
Yeah, and why there's little accountability.
Very hard to disprove.
Yeah, because even within the world, like if Chris Valentin wants to call out Bob Hartley for doing that sort of stuff, it's like you got to have hard evidence, and very rarely will you have hard evidence on these particular things, unless you like have their iPad or you have their son who was there and saw it happen and helped.
Yes, hello. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's why your story is so important. Okay, do we want to get into the Thailand thing? And that's where we're going to pause on part 1 of the Q&A session with Jedidiah Hartley. I did not know that it was going to last this long, but honestly, we could talk for a very long time about these things, and we really did just want to go through all of the big questions that you guys submitted. So go ahead and go to part 2. It is there for you now.